Hello and welcome to this special episode for Halloween 2024, currently going by the terrible title of All Hallows Screen. Better titles are very much welcome. I'm joined by a fantastic guest who I'm really looking forward to talking to, the slopophobic cephalopod, Mr. John Dee, here to discuss a special film beloved to us both, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Hello, Mr. Dee.
Hello, and very happy and honored to be invited onto your excellent channel and to have a conversation about this film, which is, as you say, I mean, it is I would say one of my favorite films of all times. As people may know, I'm quite a aficionado of Mr. Kubrick's work, but this film, for various reasons, holds a very special place for me. So yeah, delighted to come and talk about it.
Fantastic. I mean, when you had mentioned that it was one of your favourites, I just thought, okay, I must converse. I was holding out for it to be covered on other channels, but when that looked like it wasn't happening, I thought I had to throw my hat into the ring.
Indeed, yes. I mean, there have been long discussed plans. People may know that I used to be the co-host of the late lamented Unpopular Opinions, which is a show on Academic Agent's channel, and but I also used to do cultural, sort of live streams with him occasionally, and there was long planned to do a series of streams about Kubrick films, but alas, it never materialized. So that may happen sometime in the future with other people, or I don't know. But it is wonderful to finally be able to talk about it, because I've been looking forward to having a conversation, and then especially delightful to have it with you. An aficionado of the genre.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you, very kind indeed. I'll also do a very brief prefacing. Yes, my voice is absolutely dying. There's been a lot of recording lately. I do hope you can all power through it. With that said, you said this is a beloved film of yours. I suppose I'd love to ask, what jumps out at you about The Shining? What is it that earns it a place in your heart, Mr. D?
Well, I suppose there's several things about it. I mean, first of all, I mean the it was an absolutely novel idea to make a grand like horror film, at the time that it was made. I mean, this idea of making a truly cinematic, expansive, almost kind of operatic film, because it was a genre that was, that various times was sort of neglected or sort of relegated to its own particular
Mm,
position as a, as a sort of films often for teenagers. There were, of course, there was a huge market for kind of lower budget efforts in the 1950s and 60s and beyond. So I think to treat a, a, a subject like this in the way that he did, in terms of how the camera is used, how things are treated, how the scenarios are done, the sets, all of that. So that is something that attracted me to it. It just sort of, as with many, if you sort of go through Kubrick's catalog, um, it's almost as if he sort of tackled each genre. It's like, well, okay, I'm going
mm,
to do it. I'm going to do a history. I'm going to do a costume history piece. Which was originally intended to be about Napoleon, but it ended up being Barry Lyndon. And then I want to do a film. I'm going to do a Vietnam War film. So of course, Full Metal Jacket. Okay, and I want to do a kind of psychological thriller, and then It's Eyes Wide Shut. And so it is almost like Kubrick sort of went through various sort of genres of screen fiction, and said, okay, I'm going to do each of these in my own particular way, with my own sort of subtle twists and takes. So
mm,
yeah, that was certainly a thing. But also, the other thing that has long attracted me to The Shining is that there is a lot, I think, philosophically going on. I mean, there are a lot of, I would say, very esoteric references. There's a lot sort of having to deal with uh, the idea of the mind, the idea of the spirit, the sort of
mm,
contrast between the body and the mind. Again, questions about the nature of God, the nature of the soul. and also kind of delving into sort of the kind of various nightmares of the 20th century, the sort of dip into the psychoanalytic and this sort of long desire to scientize the mind, and so I think there's just a lot going on. There's a lot of subtext going on in The Shining, which of course is just it's right up my right up my street, because I sort of deal with similar themes in my own artwork. So yeah, so I would say that those are certainly two reasons.
There are so many threads there I would want to pick on, but if I may first just absolutely agree in my somewhat croaky way. Um, yeah, you've really picked up on something so key there, that when Kubrick takes a picture, he almost seems to want to get under the skin of a genre. I found it incredibly telling that for Full Metal Jacket, all he knew is he wanted to do a war film, and he really wasn't sure which war. So the specifics were there, and he has specific Vietnam commentary, but he's much more into the nature of war and speaking a message that's much more core. He was considering, do I do World War One? Do I do an adaptation of the Iliad? He was going to work with John Milius of Conan the Barbarian on that one. Um,
Wow.
mind-blowing details I got. That's in the 2024 Colker and Abrams biography, which is an odd tome, a very odd tome, with its very specific focuses, but it does have these odd bits of infill details that you don't get anywhere else, such as the John Mills collection. In the case of this, I do feel like I don't know if you disagree, but I feel in this one Stanley is a bit dualist. He wants to make the best films, perfect films, but he's also not unaware that he needs to make a hit. Um, and there's always a bit of I guess, a tension there. And I feel he took this one on, having seen how The Exorcist performed and having turned down the chance to direct that film, having had troubles to get any Academy Award recognition himself, um, which is its own fairly tortured tale. Um, he sees Clockwork Orange get a bit passed up, and then The Exorcist show that horror can be extremely successful and also earn esteem. And I think after the failure of Barry Lyndon, that was quite a big motivation for him to say yes to um, this novel that I think he saw as a good starting point, but something that needed to be radically overhauled for it to be worthy.
Yeah, yes, I would agree with that. I mean, there is another thread, I think, running through a lot of Kubrick. Not to say that you know Thackeray's source material for Barry Lyndon is mediocre, but he did sort of have a habit of not sort of taking works that suggested or that had a kind of fertile starting point, that he then of course could apply his own sort of vision and take. And the Shining is a great example, because of course I've only read it once, the Stephen King novel, and I am not particularly enamored of Mr. King's writing style. And of course everyone who has read it will know that it's very different. The kind of
Mm,
core premises are very different. And he and of course Stephen King had a fraught relationship. And Stephen King famously, of course, didn't like Kubrick's film. And and then I think in the 2000s there was a kind of Stephen King approved version made, which I've never seen.
mm.
Um, but
I can't recommend it, Mr. D.
oh, it's not.
I'm a completionist, but I cannot recommend it. 1997 CGI.
Oh, it was.
Ooh.
Oh, it was. Okay, it was 97. I thought it was in the 2000s. All right.
It was about then. I could be wrong. It's thereabouts.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's one of those things. I mean, I mean, this may be, maybe an unpopular opinion, but I mean, for instance, I thought that the television miniseries of his novel It was very good until until you actually get the reveal, at the end
Mm,
of what the entity actually is. And of course, it's enormously, stupidly disappointing because, of course, Tim Curry had created, the one of the more terrifying characters of all time in
mm,
cinema with with Pennywise the clown, and then of course it turns out to be a big spider or something. So I mean, there is that. I think that problem, that Mr. King sort of explores territory which is which is very ripe, and then of course often fumbles at the end. So
mm,
yes, Kubrick. I think Kubrick chose the book because of these implications that perhaps he felt were not entirely fulfilled by the book. There's one of my favorite
mm,
anecdotes about the relationship between Kubrick and Stephen King, is that apparently, uh, I mean, obviously Kubrick lived in England.
mm,
Once he moved to England in the early 1960s, he never left again. He wouldn't fly. So, but he would telephone Stephen King at at odd moments and just ask these questions. So apparently, at one night at 3 o'clock in the morning, Stephen King's time, the telephone rang. And he picked it up, and of course, he hears Stanley Kubrick's distinctive voice saying, "Stephen, do you believe in God?" Which is just, I just absolutely love this idea of Stanley Kubrick calling Stephen King at 3 o'clock in the morning and asking if he believes in God. So,
I mean, the Kubrick phone calls are notorious. In the numerous biographies, it's just a case of he'll have them on the phone for 5 hours, six
yeah,
hours.
yeah,
I think Michael Hare described their relationship as a single phone call that lasted 3 years, something like that.
that's great.
And Mr. D, I've got to ask, can you picture Stephen King's face, fresh from tweeting furiously, and he hears that his sequel to The Shining, Doctor Sleep, is being filmed, and unfortunately, Stephen, they are. It's going to be a sequel to Stanley's The Shining. I'm afraid you've been cucked. Get in that chair, boy.
Well, and yes,
Imagine the
and
fury.
everyone knows. I mean, everyone knows that the Kubrick version. I'm sure not, perhaps
Mm,
not everyone, but everyone certainly. That is the definitive version of that story.
mm,
It's a film. It's an adaptation that superseded the source, the book.
of course, and as I think in many cases, a film should be able to do. Look, you're getting the story, and you should tell it as in a way that suits the new medium. But you can also make improvements that the original author missed. I think a good example is Barry Lyndon. There's some contrivances removed over someone being a secret uncle, and
Mm,
uh, maybe a better one is Clockwork Orange, where the thing that gets Alex found out when he returns to the scene of the crime at Mr. Alexander's in the book, I believe, is a passing reference to his friend. He uses the word dim, which is also the name of a fellow Droog, and in the film, Stanley says no, he sings the same song,
yeah,
uh, which is a much stronger connection. So yes,
much stronger connection. Of course, it's also. I mean, it's also Kubrick knew that it had to be a cinematic moment, and it had to be absolutely unforgettable.
mm,
That is one of the kind of, I would say, the sort of linchpins around which that film sort of revolves, and people remember that. I mean, people that the image and the sound, the music, that reference
mm,
is just it goes, uh it's sort of, it's like that line that I always quoted from Jonathan Bowden. It goes underneath the mind, or it goes below the mind, the level of the sort of conscious mind. Um,
mm,
and of course, yeah, yes, and the way it's done in the book, it just it may be a solution for the book, but it needed something to be cinematic, and so he understood this, and the same in The Shining. There
mm,
are many moments in The Shining that are the story is not told. The story is told. There's a story being told visually and sonically,
mm,
and there's a story also being told narratively, and they meet, but they also diverge. They diverge and they converge. I mean, this is another thing that happens in Barry Lyndon, is that you're looking at sort of these absolutely breathtaking images, which themselves, of course, have all sorts of reference to art history and sort of British history, and then you
Mm,
also have a narrator who is giving you a version of the story that you're seeing, and they don't actually line up. And it's the unreliable narrator. But I think this
mm,
is something that comes up so much in Kubrick, is this idea that there is it's primarily things that are happening symbolically, things that are happening in
mm,
archetypes, things that are happening in color and movement and facial expression, and that the story, of course, has its own role to play as the framework, as a structure. But there's a whole other thing going on, and I think this is what many mediocre films forget. It's not a visual medium is a visual medium, and
mm.
when you forget about that, then of course you're making a teleplay. It's just two different art forms.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that explains, on some level, why I think everyone likes a Kubrick film better on a second viewing, and even more on a third. You've sort of been hit with it the first time, and then you can start to unpiece it. And I think that phrase of it getting going sort of under the mind is true. You feel a desire to return and try and work something out. Um,
Yes, I
I
would
tend to
absolutely
find that goes
absolutely
on.
agree, and I think great art always works this way. I mean, great art. The thing is, of course, is that I think at the center of every piece of genius, whether it be music or a book or a film or whatever, any sort of creative work that I think passes into the sort of realm of genius and masterpiece. But I think at the center of those things is an unsolvable riddle, or a mystery, which it can never fully be revealed. I mean, of course, it will tantalizingly give you all of these wonderful threads, all of these cul-de-sacs and half solutions and such, but you can never really resolve it. And of course, it's very difficult to, when you sort of set out to do that, when it's not the product of inspiration, I would call divine inspiration. When it is sort of engineered, it doesn't always work. But I just think that great works of art, they are great works of art, and we return to them again and again because they never give up all of their secrets. And
Mm,
again, this is something that I think is a remarkable quality in The Shining, especially.
mm. Uh, would there be an example of something like that that you'd like to sort of focus in on to sort of say draw out for people, um,
That's
of something that has all those layers?
Yeah. Okay. So for me, I mean, well, I mean, there's a couple. I mean, I think one of the moments which I think people often miss is one of the questions that is presented by the film. Is this real, or is
Mm,
this psychological? Is this happening in someone's mind, whether it be Jack Torrance's mind or Danny Torrance's mind or Wendy Torrance's mind? Because of course we get sort of evidence for all of them. I mean, we get evidence that some of what we're seeing, or perhaps all of what we're seeing, is is some sort of delusion or some sort of vision presented through one of these three characters. Uh, and of course, is what is happening supernatural? Like, is it actually supernatural? I mean, this sort of goes back a bit to the question of, Stephen, do you believe in God? Because of
mm,
course, what is the architecture of this universe? I mean, is it a sort of, again, is it purely a kind of study of the breakdown of a man's psychology, or family psychology, or are there actual spirits? Are there demons? Are there ghosts? And again, the film toys with us the whole way through. But there's one moment, I think, in a way that where Kubrick gives the answer, and I think it's something that people miss. And of course, the fact that he does give us an answer, and that it's a subtle thing that many people miss. And but then again, you say, well, is that really? Is it did it actually answer the question? And so the moment for me is, uh, people recall that Wendy Torrance strikes Jack with a baseball bat, and and when he is in that famous scene on the grand stair, and she drags him. He's slowly sort of regaining consciousness. She drags him into that kitchen, uh, and into the larder. Of course, people certainly remember that scene. I mean, he's sort of waking up as she drags him in there, and she shuts the door to the larder, and it has a latch. It's like very much like a commercial. It actually looks like commercial a room, a freezing room, or a refrigerated room, but it's not. It's just a larder. But she closes the latch, and then there is a close up shot of her inserting the pin into the latch,
Mm.
which locks it. And of course, there is no way to get out once that happens. Because it's shown very. I mean, Kubrick makes a very big deal of showing how thick the door is. And of course the
Mm.
size of the latch, and the fact that you are very explicitly shown that Wendy puts the pin in and locks it. And so then Jack has a conversation with the one of the spirits he meets, Delbert Grady,
Mm.
who gives his name as Delbert Grady. Uh, and Grady's tone changes. Of course, there's a whole scene in the toilets where he has a
Mm.
conversation with Grady, and Grady is sort of being obsequious, and but also obviously kind of urging Jack to have certain ideas and thoughts about what's happening. But by the time, of course, Jack is locked in the larder, Grady has a very different tone. You don't see Grady the second time; you just hear his voice. But
Mm.
he mocks Jack, and he says, I don't think you have the belly for it. I don't think to do what needs to be done, i.e., to murder your family." And Jack says, Grady, basically something to the effect of Grady, there was nothing I would rather do. And then the next thing we see is that Jack is out of the larder. And so for me,
Mm.
that is that is an answer that Kubrick has given us, because there is no way that isn't some huge contrivance that he could have gotten out of there. It's shown he slams his body against the door a few times. I mean, you're sort of given the information that he's not going to get out of there under his own power, and yet of course he
Mm.
escapes. And so I think that it is interesting that pin, literally this lint pin on the lock, is the sort of answering the question. That is the only provably supernatural thing that we see in the entire film. So that has
Yeah,
always been very interesting to me.
it's a great choice, and I know Stanley. Well, one of the few times he's spoken on the films. It's not that he never speaks, but it is rare. And I think that was his intention, to really draw you up to that moment. And I've seen attempts to, I mean, notably and inevitably, Robert Agar came up with 5 ways that are non-supernatural that Jack could have gotten out, but I do think they are rather stretching the matter quite a lot.
Yeah,
And Kubrick, in this case, has let us know what he wanted for that. But there's, even within that, there are levels to it. As ever, when you see the maze, there's a particular level of, did this even happen? Um, I think the fact that Jack is in, I think it is a refrigerated larder, isn't it? Um, I'm fairly sure it is. If I'm wrong, I'll take a huge humiliating
no,
L here. But
I would agree with you. It certainly. I have never seen a non-refrigerated larder that looks like that. So,
Mm.
but I don't remember if there's a moment where he's shown like shivering or something inside of it. So uh, I will defer to your judgment of that.
Oh, well, if it is, then in some way the fact that he ends up still frozen to death is in a way echoing that he didn't do the task and he didn't get out. Now that causes further plot complications, who kills Hallorann, etc. But this is one of those ways where it's more symbolic and it doesn't have to tie to an extremely literal interpretation of what happened. It's more like this sort of symbolic echo of his fate that effectively he never got out. And the, yeah, well, as I say, things are particularly complicated when we talk about the maze, which is one of the great central mysteries of this film.
Yeah, yeah,
I always delight in pointing out to people that when you see the overhead shots, those rare second unit photography shots of the I think it was Timberline Lodge in Oregon.
yeah.
The maze is not
It's
there,
not there. It's obviously not
and
there.
that's a bit of a mind blowing one. So you're like, okay, so we are not talking about a literal maze. So let's go from there, and that's a thread you can pull on for hours.
Yeah. Well, I think
I
this.
love pointing that out to people.
I know yes. I mean, that's again one of these things where okay. I mean, the most flat-footed explanation is that it was just it's a production mistake.
Mm,
I don't think so. I think I'm certain it's something Kubrick noticed. I mean, there is famously, just as a quick aside, there is a production mistake in the very beginning of the film with the shadow of a helicopter, which was, of course,
mm,
the second unit filming the Volkswagen, driving down the road. That was actually removed
mm.
in the late '90s or early 2000s, with when there was a way to do it with CGI. That was actually removed from the. So when you
Yeah,
watch new versions, but if you watch an old version, you will see this shadow, but it's no longer there.
it
But
is there on my dusty VHS.
yeah, exactly. I have a DVD version, a very early one. In fact, I think it was the
Mm,
original DVD release which has it. But again, I think the fact that the absence of the maze, I don't think that would have escaped Kubrick, and I think that that is something he could have avoided in certain ways that it would have been photographed. So yeah, but I think that this feeds in, and the same with the question about what was the nature of Jack's demise? Was
mm,
his freezing? What was it as presented, or was it, of course, as you say, a kind of the consequence of that the fact that he didn't actually get out? We never really know whether we're looking at an illusion, whether we're looking at
mm.
again a sort of fantasy in the mind of one or more of the characters, or we don't ever we're never really given sort of
No.
a guide between what is real and what is not. So even that explanation, like my thing about the pin in the latch, uh even that is it's not really proof. And this is what I sort of meant is that even when it's seemingly revealing its mysteries, it never really does. It never really lets go.
Yeah, I mean, but to use your earlier reference, Mr. D, this film never shows you the spider. If
No.
it makes it concrete,
Yeah.
if you see the spider, game over. You
Yep.
know,
Yep. And of
and
course,
we've all been there. Would Rosemary's Baby have been improved by a little wibbly thing covered in latex? No,
no,
no, no, no, no, no.
no. Um,
But this might be a trivial one, but I just thought I've been blessed with the occasion to talk about The Shining a few times recently. I've never managed to mention this point, but since you mentioned DVDs and VHSs, I thought something I'd throw in here um, is that there are several continuity errors. Well, then I think only the helicopter is a confirmed error. People point out continuity errors like Jack's typewriter changes colour. In a
yeah.
confrontation with Wendy, there's a chair in the background that changes. It's sort of there or it's not there over and over again. Lots of things like that in a way that I have not seen in other Kubrick films. And I I raise this because it helps the uncertainty, the sort of, did I see that? Was that there? It builds that, which is very thematically relevant to The Shining. But also, at the time Mr. Kubrick was making this, he was very aware that VHS was becoming available. Um, so commercially became available about 1976 in the US. And Mr. Kubrick was always ahead of the game on technology, right there, early adopter on everything. Really keen on that. And he knew from this, I believe, that people would go back with extreme attention. There's a great example from a lifelong friend of his, Alexander Walker, who designed the scrapbook that we see very briefly in there, who'd warned him that people will pause and read every article that is on screen.
Yep.
So we can't just fake it. We can't lorem ipsum datum every article,
Exactly.
which is one of my slightly autistic tendencies, Mr. D. I will pause
Yep.
everything and read
Same.
an article to look.
Same. Absolutely the same. Yeah. Yes. And of
But
course,
Stanley rewards you
he,
if you read it.
he's certainly. It's a bit like sort of video games that have that have because I was the sort of person I just remember playing things like Resident Evil, whatever. I will read all of the notes. I want all of the story. Dark Souls. I will try to. I need to know every little thing. Every little bit of lore that's presented to me. So I would certainly do that. I will
This might
add.
be esoteric, Mr. D, but in Resident Evil 2, did you search a certain police desk 50 times?
Yeah. Absolutely. I've got a good concrete example of that. And to add the thing about certainly the VHS is The Shining uh, was notable because it was the first film where Stanley Kubrick had what's called video playback. So prior to that, when you were photographing a film, I mean, for younger listeners, films actually used to be filmed on on a piece of plastic called film, that had a layer of light sensitive emulsion that ran through a camera. And of course, the issue with that is that prior to uh, videotape, which is a technology that of course doesn't require films, much cheaper. And of course, the problem with film is that
Hmm.
it has to be processed and it has to be printed. So, this is a negative film. So after you shoot, you do your day shooting, the film has to go to a laboratory and it is processed, which turns it into a negative, and then it has to be printed. It has to be run and exposed to another piece of fresh
Hmm.
film, and then that has to be processed, and you get what we get is what it's called rush prints, and often back in the day, these would be delivered, literally as a rush, could be delivered the next day, and then there would be a period of
The
time where
dailies.
everyone get together and they'd watch the rushes. But The
Hmm.
Shining, for the first time, the film cameras were also equipped with a video pickup, and which meant that after they had shot something, Kubrick could immediately look
Hmm.
at the video of what the camera saw, so he could get some idea of, again, did it work or not. You didn't have to wait until the next day. Now, of course, this did not this
Hmm.
did not reduce Kubrick's shooting ratio, which was the shooting ratio is how much raw film was exposed during production compared to how much film is in the final cut. And The Shining has I believe, still has one of the highest shooting ratios ever. Kubrick shot an enormous amount of film,
Hmm.
and so so the video playback didn't really reduce that, but he did have the ability again to watch what he had just shot, and so I think because of his sort of perfectionist attitude, obvious continuity errors would have been he would have noticed them, and they did.
Hmm.
They can happen. Yeah, any production, of course, is a big chaotic thing, and there's lots of time, and it's very easy for for continuity errors to creep in. But I suspect he probably would have noticed those big ones.
In a film about doubting sanity, where he goes out of his way to design, make the place a maze, where a maze is symbolic, and designs a set that is physically impossible. It just goes out of his way to get you confused and disorientated. I think there's no way it's accidental. Um, there is, of course, well, again, so many threads, so many turns we could take, Mr. D. Um, there's something I was really intrigued to read about Stanley Kubrick's methodology is that, yes, he's a perfectionist, but he's not a sort of, or he wasn't rigid. So this sort of numerous takes thing, particularly in this stage of his filmmaking, he was really getting very loose with his scripting and really enjoying basically giving himself options because he wanted to find the film in the edit. Often, and he also believed that if he told the actors exactly what he wanted, they would overemphasize it and get it wrong. He needed them to sort of stumble across it, um, which I found fascinating. Something some actors hated. Some of the older school actors in Paths of Glory got instantly
Yeah,
and really just approved and said, yes, obviously. You can't say, give me more energy, because then people end up acting like they've just been chugging
yeah,
four Monster Zeros or
yeah.
whatever Zoomers chug down. Um,
Yeah, they end up overemphasizing things. Now, I will say that people who are interested in The Shining, many people already know that this exists. But one of Kubrick's daughters, named Vivian Kubrick, um,
mm,
she was I think about 16 or 17 years old at the time,
mm,
and her father she got her a 16 millimeter sound camera. This is a sort of camera that used to be used for news, sort of newsreels. So when you had to send reporters to a scene, and gave her a camera and allowed her to shoot a behind the scenes documentary of the making of The Shining. Now, this is extraordinarily valuable because this is not
mm,
something Kubrick would have allowed anyone else to do ever. There is precious little quote behind the scenes film of any of Kubrick's productions. So I would say that The Shining is especially privileged to have this available. And of course, she intercut the kind of things that she shot on the set with also with interviews,
mm,
which were are sort of in intercut the and the and it's an actual piece. It's not just footage, it's an actual film that
mm,
she produced, and it is I think absolutely vital to sort of watch that because there are other dynamics going on, including of course that there was a psychological operation going on with the way that Kubrick dealt with the various actors, namely
yes.
Jack Nicholson and the late lamented Shelley Duvall. And
Yeah.
if you
I've
watch
referred to this as method directing,
method
which,
directing, he is it now again. The very interesting part is that afterwards and in this documentary, because you get interviews that were conducted after production had ended,
mm,
Shelley Duvall has nothing but really in the end praise. She just said that she
mm,
understood it was a tremendous, and of course we discovered later that Shelley Duvall had very long standing, you know sort of issues of her own,
mm,
psychological issues of her own, sadly. And but from all accounts, the production of this film, which went on for a very long time, much longer than general, sort of a general film production schedule. So
mm,
yes, and it was apparently an absolutely torturous experience. And if you watch it, Kubrick is quite mean to Shelley Duvall, And with Jack, he's just like, all right, Jack, fine, it's good. But she's like, oh come on, Shelley, and there's a wonderful moment where she's meant to open the door of the Overlook and come out into the blowing snow, and she misses her cue, and he goes and storms over, and he gives her a absolute bollocking, and she's standing there holding this giant knife, wearing it with a dressing gown.
Mm.
No, if people have not seen that, certainly look at it, because there are some dynamics going on uh, behind the
Oh,
scenes.
it's brutal. In the 2024 biography, I read that they revealed that he literally assigned members of staff to be horrible to her and a couple to support her.
Oh no, I didn't know.
Evil
I didn't know that.
genius.
Oh my god,
Evil genius.
absolutely evil. Well, but because she was basically she was kept in a state of near hysteria for like over a year, I believe, or at least very
Mm,
close to a year. And keep in mind,
14 months.
14 months, yeah. And
Oh,
keep
yeah.
in mind, of course, they were both away from home, because they
Mm,
had to be to be in England. That's where the film was shot. Um, so yeah, yes, I mean she's absolutely red eyed and hysterical for the entirety of that production, and it shows. I mean, again, not to impugn her acting, because it's not just the result of her being brutalized off camera, but the combination of that and her just sort of the sort of vulnerability that she projects.
mm.
No, it's absolutely devastating. You can see why it. You can see why he conducted it that way, but it's certainly probably not a terribly nice experience.
No, well, absolutely. It's just, I suppose the only thing we could say in the defense is no one had a harder time on set than Stanley Kubrick. I mean, he was just a relentless worker. He exhausted himself, he damaged his health,
Yeah,
uh, more on Full Metal Jacket and Eyes Wide Shut than this, but nevertheless, like he did not take it easy on himself in the least. Um, but uh, people criticize Shelley Duvall a lot, and her performance has been extremely unjustifiably condemned. But as we sort of touched on, I don't think any of this stuff is accidental. One of the moments that comes up is her running around the hotel in that quite goofy manner, if you recall, um, like arms flailing. I don't know why I'm doing it here. You cannot see me on video. Um, I always thought that was extremely deliberate. Like, imagine it yourself. Um, wacky, wacky waving inflatable arms, dude. Mode. Like, she's doing that. Obviously, that has not got through by accident. He has told her to run like that. And my read of this is that Wendy has a sort of separate story where Stanley almost sarcastically serves you up a horror film. Like, this is a slop you want, right? Look, she's a bimbo
yeah,
running around waving her
yeah,
arms, and look, she's seen a spooky, spooky
yeah.
skeleton.
Exactly. Yeah, that's
I
another
think
wonderful
he's
point.
having a laugh at the slop lovers.
Yeah. No, I mean I mean, so
Mm,
as I said, there's sort of the conflict that you at times seem to be getting the different characters sort of you get their visions of what the Overlook is, and of
mm,
course Jack. I mean, well, I won't go into it now. I mean, he does have a kind of central confrontation, and of course it reveals
mm,
his own particular what's behind door number one, of his
mm,
particular motivations or psychosis. And of course we see Danny, as a child who of course is not fully, sort of grown into reason, and so his visions
mm,
are, strange and terrifying, and not entirely more to, to anything, not sort of beyond his interpretation of them. And then of course, what is
mm.
Wendy's vision of the Overlook? It's a series of yeah, exactly, of like horror movie cliches. She literally the spooky skeleton, you know excellent party, the man with his head split open. The one of the weirdest shots, of course, is the man in the bear costume filleting the gentleman in tuxedo in one of the rooms.
Well, I gather Stanley Kubrick had recently attended the Tory Party conference and had taking notes. So
that's that's what
that's how
actually
I understand it.
that was actually what was going on in the Overlook. Yeah, it was an eternal Tory Party. Oh God.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. D. Since you mentioned Vivian Kubrick, do you know what she's up to now?
Uh I I don't know what she's up to now. I will say that. Sorry, someone is gunning a motorbike. If you hear something in the background, um,
Right.
I do know, of course, that I have very bad feelings about her because she became a Scientologist
Sadly, yes.
in the
Mm.
1990s and basically abandoned her family, abandoned her, all of them. In fact, the last, I believe, unless something has changed, the last time she saw her mother, Christiana, or her sisters,
Mm.
was at Stanley's funeral, and which she attended with a Scientology
Mm.
monitor who came, a representative of the church came with her for
Oh,
that
you're
occasion.
absolutely on the money, I'm afraid.
Yeah, so
Yes.
I don't know, and I'm very ill disposed towards her because, and of course, one of Kubrick's daughters passed on, not
Mm.
terribly long ago.
Anya,
Yeah, Anya. Yeah,
yes.
yes, and
Terribly early. She was only 50, and
yeah,
she had put her focus into being an opera singer.
yeah, yes, and of course,
Mm.
again, and of course, Christiana Kubrick is, is still living, Kubrick's widow. But
Mm.
it's just terribly sad what happened. So, yes, but
Yes, well,
I don't know what she's doing.
I can't make it much more bright, but she's gone. What do we call them? Q-tarded.
Oh,
She likes Q. She's a big fan of Infowars. She streamed with Owen Benjamin,
oh
but
God.
she does assure you that her father did not fake the moon landing. So there's something.
Okay, that's something. No, I mean, not that that was ever an actual question. Anyone
Yes,
insane, but
I did really admire her, and I had her back in the biographies when she was striking out on her own, and but then yes, the turn into Scientology does sour it massively, and
yeah,
I've
because
held out hopes that we'll get her making of Full Metal Jacket because there are 18 hours of footage which were very briefly glimpsed in
yeah,
one documentary, but
it
it's never been put together.
never
There's a
been put together.
project for
No,
someone.
no, never been put together. I will say, of course, Kubrick fans will know that that she composed and performed a large portion of the soundtrack to Full Metal Jacket under a pseudonym, uh,
Mm,
which in fact I can see her pseudonym was Abigail Mead. So basically, half, the the music, the sort of cinematic, theatrical music, not the not the pop songs, but yeah, that was all Vivian Kubrick. It was all done on electronic instruments. I believe that she was had made sort of proximate friends with Wendy Carlos during the
mm,
during the period of The Shining, and so I do wonder to what degree Wendy Carlos's influence, sort of led Vivian Kubrick into sort of synthesis and that electronic music, but sadly,
that-
yeah,
mm,
sadly, I've always wondered if it was Tom Cruise, uh, who who uh, who first interested her in the Church of Scientology, because of course I think her conversion was right around the time that Eyes Wide Shut was being shot.
mm. Well, she left for LA in about 87, and the
Mm,
preparatory stuff for Eyes Wide Shut was 93. But Stanley was approaching her to do the music for Eyes Wide Shut, so there could be the contact there.
mm,
That's a really interesting idea about her intersecting with Wendy Carlos because Carlos sort of keeps up this strain of Kubrick, just preferring classical music.
yeah,
Um, and then is sort of Vivian sort of notably goes for a largely pop song soundtrack for Full Metal Jacket, but it still does some originals in there. So yeah, I do wonder what the influence there was.
I wonder. I mean, I know I I once saw Wendy Carlos on the walking down the streets of New York, and but I was too terrified to actually approach her because I know that she's
Mm,
also a very difficult and very private person. So I again
mm,
I'm just speculating that there may have been some sort of friendship with between Vivian and her. I don't actually know. I mean, to be fair, I mean, Kubrick was also not a particularly great friend to various people with whom he worked. I mean, there's a famous
mm,
story about Malcolm McDowell, who Kubrick became very close to, really sort of
mm,
became a kind of quasi father figure during the production of Clockwork Orange, and then when it was over, just dropped him and would never would never really speak with him again. And of course, I've heard Malcolm McDowell on a number of occasions talk about how devastating this was. So,
mm.
again, Kubrick perhaps not the best of of friends. Wonderful father,
Maybe
apparently.
method directing again.
Method
Maybe
directing again. Yeah,
he needed Alex confident and
yeah.
uh, oh sorry Malcolm. He needed Malcolm McDowell extremely confident as Alex, so he's sort of ultra chummy with him. I mean, I do remember a tale of him messing with Malcolm McDowell and then Malcolm repaying the favour. If you
Ooh,
can indulge me in a tangent.
yeah.
So knowing that Malcolm is extremely afraid of snakes, Stanley just greets him one morning with, "Hey, Alex has got a pet snake now.
Oh, yes.
Get it round your neck, lad." Just um, and so to just pure spite and trolling, you love to see it. But Malcolm McDowell repaid the favour in the sort of infamous three-way scene in the bedroom, filmed at 2 frames per second to speed it up. Um, Malcolm knew Stanley had sort of taken a liking to one of the girls, um, and so when things looked like they were wrapping up, Malcolm suddenly grabs that girl again and throws her down onto the bed and goes for round two, purely to sort of annoy Stanley, I believe.
Yeah, yes, and of course that's in the film. There's a sort of interregnum where they kind of all stop and then it starts up again. I didn't know that. I was not aware of that. So that's very very good.
I enjoyed that, but as you say, it must be a bit brutal. I'll just point out for anyone interested. Oh, what is it called? The Visionary Director Collection of Blu-rays for Kubrick's, which I can't generally recommend. By the way, it leaves out Doctor Strangelove, but
Ooh,
there is as yet no complete collection of his films. Malcolm McDowell has a very good audio commentary for Clockwork Orange, and weirdly gets his own uh, biographical featurette on the same disc that has Stanley Kubrick: A Life in Pictures. Um, Oddly enough,
yes,
but
I don't actually own that set, but I've seen that featurette. So
mm.
excuse me.
Yeah, it's something that I found very yeah. Our voices are dying
I
here, aren't
know
they, Mr. D?
can feel it.
Hold on, Mr. D. Um, this is probably completely trivial, and you can tell me off for being trivial. But something did stand out to me as a tad odd. Um, Not on the Blu-ray, but on the 4K release of The Shining that I got. Purely because I needed to get my hands on the US edition. Well, I wanted to pay for the US edition. Let's put it that way. With all those 25 extra minutes. On the 4K, The Shining is now a 15, downgraded. This probably means absolutely nothing and is of no significance whatsoever, but it did strike me as a tad odd. No?
Yeah, I have heard some or read some reference to that. I don't have I don't have the 4K release, so I don't know. Yeah, yeah, there was I remember hearing some mention of that, and I don't honestly don't know. Yeah, I don't know why that would be.
It has it. The film is unchanged. It has no effect on it. It's
Mm,
just as someone a tad obsessed with the BBFC. I track these things.
mm.
But yeah, I always wondered. I It hasn't happened yet, but I'm pretty sure Psycho could get a PG. I'm pretty sure.
Mm,
So it's only the odd shot that would give them trouble. I think it could make the move now.
yeah.
But
I,
yes, that's possibly leading us down fruitless tangents. Maybe you could direct back to the danger of a. Can you imagine being Jack Nicholson and letting yourself be filmed flirting with the director's daughter?
Oh, yeah, that's
What a
amazing.
madman!
What absolute mad lad. Yes. I mean, yeah, I mean, there's wonderful moments, where, I mean, with the documentary starts in Jack's dressing room, and you have
Mm,
this weird moment, he's like, you look cute today, Viv, and then follows him into the bath when he's cleaning his teeth, and he's like, hey, I have to take a piss, and then he closes the door, and there's like a page three girl, pin up on the
mm,
back of the toilet door, and there's another moment where he's pulling his microphone, which is of course a wireless unit taped to his chest, and he's just
mm,
very lascivious looks at young Vivian Kubrick. But I think that he and Stanley had quite a rapport. Yeah, but
mm.
I do like those moments. There's another wonderful moment where apparently, of course, Kubrick rewrote, as you mentioned, a very freewheeling approach to the script, and there was never a definitive version of it. And each day they would be handed new sides, with the changed words that they'd spent all night, sort of learning. And there's a shot of production doing something, and Stanley is sat in that kitchen in the kitchen set with his little manual typewriter, like literally rewriting the scene. Yeah,
Right in front of them.
right in front of them.
Yeah,
Uh, but sadly, I mean,
I
that's
love that stuff.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
and then it's just, but again, it is a wonderful way to work, and anyone, again, this image of Kubrick as a perfectionist. I think it's very important to understand that, as you said earlier, that he was not. It did not mean he was rigid. He was certainly like all the rest of them. He was at the end of the day an artist, even though again he's making a commercial film. There are all these other constraints, but still within that, there was a lot of room, certainly for a figure like Kubrick to be able to take things in a different direction as he saw fit, and that's what you've got to do. There's no, you don't know until you're on the set with the actors,
Mm,
whether something is going to work that you've written, that you've had in your head, and you just see, you get better ideas, and yeah, I mean, it's wonderful, and you get a sense of that certainly again watching this little
mm,
documentary. So, uh,
absolutely, and he was open to improvisation. Now, um, I've read conflicting reports on this. I know there are a few cases where actors are free to improvise, um, but when people suggested how to direct, I think he took a great deal of umbrage,
yeah,
even if he later used those ideas. I believe the famous shot from underneath Jack when he's locked in the larder and he's doing what they call the old Kubrick stare.
yeah.
What Stanley is literally laying on his back filming him. And that had been someone else's suggestion, someone who found themselves unemployed as a result of making that suggestion.
Wow,
Stanley told them where to go.
oh, I didn't know that, because that shot is it's just a quintessential Kubrick shot. I mean, people know
Mm,
Kubrick's work. You mentioned the Kubrick stare, but he just in general tends to favor quite extreme sort of, especially, I mean, so again, as like the cinematography, the way that Jack is photographed
mm,
changes as the film goes on, and it becomes more like, again, that shot makes Jack Nicholson look terrible, absolutely weird, and again, when try hanging your head over, if you're over a certain age, try hanging your face over a mirror and looking at what happens as everything falls forward. It's not pretty. But again, it was very much a Kubrick sort of thing to do, to kind of make him seem almost animalistic and distorted and dehumanized, and you get this. So I'm quite surprised that that was not his idea. That when you see again Vivian Kubrick's documentary of the behind the scenes, you actually can see them filming that, as you said, with Kubrick lying on the floor. My other favorite
Mm.
detail of that is that the lighting is a single lamp, a single light bulb, uh, which is sort of on a kind of plank of wood, lying, I believe, on Kubrick's body, and Kubrick is using his hand as the light diffuser. So he is literally like hovering his hand over this bulb, and that was the lighting for that scene. It's absolutely brilliant to see that, to see
Yeah,
him doing something like that. But again, this sort of freewheeling attitude, and that was very much
it's
how.
innovative, and there's another great example of that, Mr. Dee. Sorry for cutting you off, but do you know about the wheelchair?
The wheelchair. You mean in uh as used during the filming? I don't.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. So this is extremely innovative. I know there are about no, three examples prior to this, but still, Kubrick was one of the very first to use a Steadicam, and even suggested some alterations to it, and had the inventor Garrett Brown come on and help.
yeah.
But he wanted the Steadicam even lower to the ground, so they jerry rigged it to a wheelchair, and they had Stanley and about three other sound, including the guy with the bloody boom mic on a pole, on the same wheelchair being wheeled after
Yep.
Danny on his tricycle.
And
Um,
and there's actually
I
there's
wish we had a shot of that.
well, there I if I remember, there is a shot of that in the Vivian Kubrick
Oh,
thing.
I
There
missed this. I've forgotten it. Darn it.
Yeah, there is a shot of them racing down. I believe it. I don't know if it's when he's on the tricycle, or when he's running down the hallway in the kitchen, and then where he hides in the cupboard. I don't know, but I'm almost sure that there's a shot of them in the wheelchair. There. I mean, there is also a shot of Garrett Brown operating Steadicam in the maze, where with Kubrick lumbering behind him, with Stravinsky's "The Rite of Spring" playing to give Danny Lloyd motivation. But yeah, I'm always sure there's a shot of the wheelchair being operated. So, but yeah, very very good shot. That's again, it just kind of a wonderfully simple solution, to a problem that hadn't occurred to anyone before.
Yeah, I mean, even just talking about the Steadicam would be, you could. It's a deep topic, but uh, you. I just to wind back a little bit. You talked about the way Jack was shot. That was quite extreme, and where Stanley frames it. I'm prepared for you to call me an absolute loon, Mr. D, and I won't blame you for it. But I I found one thing that I did wonder might inform some of the way Jack was shot. Um, I'll have it on screen for people, but I'll show you a rough version now. Um, it's a shot from a film called Black Christmas, and I think Stanley saw this and was. Oh wait, no, this is what I need to show you. So this is Keir delay. Why would Stanley watch at the time, not particularly celebrated Canadian horror? And
Hmm.
I'd say, well, that's Keir delay, who Stanley had directed in 2001.
Yes.
There's Keir delay giving the old death stare to Olivia Hussey, and there is Jack. I'm sorry. Oh God, that's potato quality, isn't it?
No,
But
no, that's such a famous shot. I certainly know it.
I just, I wonder, Mr. D. It's 6 years earlier, but this isn't the best shot of it. I didn't have it ready, but there's one where he's a lot more central, staring slightly down, and I just wonder if Mr. Kubrick saw that and was inspired. I like the thought of it
It's
anyway.
certainly no, it's certainly possible. Yeah, certainly. certainly possible.
Mm.
Oh yeah, there's the wonderful shot right behind the tricycle. Yeah. Um,
Yeah. Oh, I like that. We talked about him being inspired by another film. I think another film was very inspired by this to an extent. There's a sort of an idea he introduces because of that Steadicam of us being the voyeur, being very implicated that we are haunting the characters, we are pursuing them with this omniscient, omnipresent view. Um, there's an interesting, if slightly sloppy, film called Amityville to the Possession, which really plays with this idea of like we are the ghost in the house following the characters. It's I don't know, I think that was another thread he got to introduce because the Steadicam gives you this very unusual motion that audiences in 1980 were just unfamiliar with.
yeah,
There'd be a, why is it, how are you doing this? Why does it look like that? That's weird. It should be shaky. And I think he knew that would, the word unsteady the audience. Um, I think
yeah.
I, something we don't pick up, of course.
We're so used to it, of course, because it just became the standard way. But you're right. I mean, that there is certainly a feeling because as far as I know, The Shining was the first commercial film that used the Steadicam extensively. I don't know if it
Hmm.
was the first of all time, but it was certainly one of the first. And
Certainly extensively.
yeah, and
That's
these shots would have been impossible to do. Now, if you look at Kubrick's earlier films, and he was very fond of tracking shots, so and that's a sort of one of his sort of trademarks of where the
mm,
camera is on a dolly, and often you get characters like walking down hallways, or famously in Paths of Glory, through the
yes.
trenches and things like that. But you couldn't again get this sense that the camera could be anywhere. I mean, this putting the camera on the floor, like right down on the floor, and then of course sometimes the camera is up above. This position is, as you say, it's disorienting. It's delocalizing the camera from its sort of position of authority. Because often the camera is going to be fixed upon, a tripod or a camera rig, and of course in earlier days of cinema, the cameras were, especially if it was like a Technicolor picture, they were enormous. Absolutely
Mm,
enormous cameras, and because of course the requirements of lighting, and these enormous cameras, we just became very acclimated to this idea of the camera being in this fixed neutral position. So yes, I do think that you're right. It was a very different way of seeing things that are happening, and that people weren't used to at the time. I mean,
mm,
the other thing,
yeah.
of course, that happens so much. I, you see it a bit in The Exorcist. Is also this very different way of dealing with light and lighting, because there is
Mm,
almost no scene in The Shining in the dark. I mean, almost every scene is brightly illuminated, with a few exceptions. And of course, particularly, I mean, that shot of Jack Nicholson standing there, just that malevolent 1,000-meter stare, that light, it's so much a kind of flat, intense winter light, the kind of light that you
mm,
get from, that being reflected off of snow, and you get that kind of quality of light, so many occasions, but it is this idea of brightly lit horror, which I was not something that Kubrick innovated. As I said, you get a bit of this in The Exorcist in 1972. There is again a lot of the most terrific things happen in very bright illumination. But it's
mm,
again a kind of novel idea, and sort of unsettling. The idea, well, often nightmares, sort of horror is wedded to to the idea of dark. darkness, concealment, the
Mm.
shadow, and of course by avoiding the shadows, the night, the dark, you were partially protected. And of course, with The Shining, you're not safe. You're not safe anywhere. You're not safe in the day. You're not safe in the night. You're not safe in a brightly illuminated hallway. Um, that nowhere is safe. Staying out of the dark isn't going to protect you. So I think there's certainly something to that. I mean, this destabilization I think was very important to Kubrick for giving a lot of the unsettling quality of the film.
Unsettling is a great word. I think if you hand someone a hotel that looks like it could be William Castle's House on Haunted Hill, all expressionist shadows,
Yeah.
etc., it might set off some sort of availability heuristic. Ooh, oh, I'm going to see a horror film now. Ooh. But you're at the same time saying, I am going to see a horror film now and I am safe and it's all fine. Whereas The Overlook is very distinctly a hotel, but a bit wrong. Just the details are far more subtle and unsettling. And this comes from Kubrick's research. We have to mention Diane Johnson. He put Stephen in his seat in the corner of the hotel and worked with an academic who'd focused on Gothic horror. There's another aspect. I'm afraid I always mention it, but almost no one seems to comment on this, so I feel the need to bring it up. He sort of steps over Stephen King, gets him bent over and leapfrogs him, and goes back a source um, to Shirley Jackson, who had Stephen King is often quoted on some of the modern editions of Shirley Jackson, especially The Haunting of Hill House, saying, "Oh, this is wonderful. This is wonderful." I think Stanley Kubrick would have been extremely aware of this and said, okay, we'll check out Shirley Jackson and the film of The Haunting of Hill House, The Haunting. And there are some shots in there that I would believe are clear homages. Some of the jump, what do you call it? A jump zoom, a smash zoom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that the
Well,
word for it? Where you suddenly go in and you're shaky a bit.
yeah. Yeah. I can't. There.
Also,
Yeah.
the ending. Oh, sorry.
It's like I crash zoom. Yeah. It's something of that nature. Sorry.
Mhm. Also, the ending, the sort of idea of almost a reincarnation or a predestination, that is straight from The Haunting and The Haunting of Hill House. Um, so sorry, audiences, no big explosion that kills the evil bad hotel. No, it's something far more unsettling. So I just like the idea that Stanley Kubrick kind of leapfrogged Stephen King and went back to a more powerful source for this. Um, but even in doing so, it is going for the psychological working of the horror rather than the sort of more accessible tropes of horror, and just aims to unsettle you in a far more insidious, effective way.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, I mean, Kubrick's meticulous research, which he did for all of his films, well, certainly the later ones became almost a sort of obsession, and sometimes took years and years and years to complete. But no, no, I mean, I would I would I would suspect there was almost no stone left unturned in in
Mm.
in the in the case of again Kubrick sort of looking into these things. And of course, there's, I mean, all of the kind of, there are also archetypal and mythological things going on. I mean, obviously the
Mm.
Minotaur, in the labyrinth,
Yes.
which of course, part of the horror is again sort of locating horror not in a scary house, or in Transylvania, or in all of the places that we've been accustomed to seeing it, but locating it in the family. That, I mean,
Mm.
locating it in this modern hotel, but also in a way the hotel is the sort of the the uncanny. I mean, that word uncanny, or in German, I might forgive
Mm.
my German, but it's what's heimlich,
Yeah,
unheimlich.
unheimlich.
Yeah, basically unhome like, quite literally. This the empty house, which again is a trope, and it is something used in horror. Which is why the abandoned house strikes us as slightly odd. I mean, this is something that Kubrick would have explored, this idea of
And
a kind of
mm,
transitory location that has all the kind of functions of a home, but of course is bereft of humans. That all the humans who pass through this will literally pass through as transitory souls. So yeah, I mean,
mm.
he's sort of bringing up these other things, which I'm sure he would have been part of his research.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yes, if a home that isn't a home is unheimlich, how much more a hotel that is empty?
Yeah,
All you feel is the absence, and of course, that enables the scale of the hotel to absolutely dwarf the humans, so that they seem kind of overpowered by the building.
yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, of course, that the hotel is also it's impossible. We see
Mm,
we see it's very clearly shown, the exterior of the hotel at the very beginning of the film, and immediately, in fact, the first thing when Jack is going into Ullman's office, you're immediately presented with architecture that it it cannot be what we saw. It cannot be the same building. It doesn't make any sense. In fact, and there are many times where we're again riding through the halls, following Danny on his tricycle, or where again following Jack going through various places, going to the kitchen, going into the various rooms, into the the servants' quarters, and
mm,
none of it makes any sense. Like you're immediately lost. I mean, there's very much an analogy between the hedge maze and the fact that the hotel is some sort of non-Euclidean geometry, existing
mm,
on its own
absolutely.
terms. When you enter
And the camera. Oh, sorry, John.
when you
Sorry.
enter the space, of course, you're immediately lost. And yes,
Mm.
sorry, go ahead.
Just to support your point, the camera in a few shots is seen losing Danny and then rushing to catch him up again. Just to further get you the sense that you're lost. So yes, it all supports that. It's wonderful, and it gets into your subconscious.
Yeah.
Um,
I would suggest. I mean, there have been writings. Unfortunately, I'm not. I don't have bibliographic materials. I can't say exactly. There certainly have been writings about The Shining, which mentioned um, this ancient concept called ars memoriae, or the art of memory. And
mm,
people can look this up. And there's a book called there's a book called uh, by an author from the 16th century called John Bruno. But there are other more ancient materials, and basically it's this whole sort of philosophical concept about using mnemonics and organizing images, organizing uh, and so it's sort of replacing it's a way to remember things, and again, there are various techniques to doing this. I mean, one of the frequently cited ones is to imagine a memory palace, a kind of architecture, and you very deliberately place the things you wish to remember in this architecture in a certain way, and you memorize concepts, or you sort of organize what you wish to remember in the context of a kind of imagined architecture. And this is something that I is certainly written about, and one of my favorite sort of ways to think about The Shining, because so much of the film is also directly or indirectly about memory. Again, about we're presented this sort of story in the present time, but it's about memory. There's even this sort of there's a line which Scatman Crothers' character, um, when he says,
mm,
about he talks about burnt toast, and that people can leave a residue, that things that
mm.
happen can actually leave a memory, on a place. And so this is I think a sort of fascinating way of sort of thinking about it, because also we are presented with architecture which is this palace of memories, but of course you can't. It's all amnesia because, of course, the architecture, you can't lead your way through it. It doesn't make any sense. Very much how what we're presented with. The idea. Well, this place has got an enormous hedge maze. Again, it's a sort of cipher for what is going on inside and what is going on in the idea of history. What is Jack's relationship temporally to this place? Was he there before? Is he some sort of eternally recurring archetypal, spirit? Anyway, I'm sorry for being a bit scattered about that, but if people look it up, I mean, art of memory, ars memoriae, it's a very
Mm.
interesting way to think about things that Kubrick is doing in the film.
Yeah, when you're saying it, I hadn't ever considered this in terms of a memory palace, but you know, immediately I think of Room 237. Literally, like in that case, it's like a locked away memory,
Yep,
which supports one of the main readings of the film. But yes, it haunts you. You can't quite get in it the first time, or rather, Danny can't quite get in the first time. But then something unlocks it for him, and suddenly he can see, even though we don't. And when he gets in it, suddenly it's that subjective camera, it's that POV shot.
yep,
Um,
and of course,
and Jack, of course, has a completely different
yeah,
recollection of the same event.
yeah. Like what? And again, I wanted to sort of mention that someone asked me a question. One of the people who's listening to one of my spaces asked me this question a couple of weeks ago. And this is
Hmm.
something I'm curious if I'm sure you've certainly read or thought about theories as well. But I mean, what Danny is explicitly warned: don't go in there. There are memories. There is a room. There are memories either associated with this place or associated with you, Danny, that you shouldn't relive. And for me, there's a very dark implication uh,
Mm.
having to do with child abuse. Specifically, the question is that obviously we know that Danny is physically abused. I mean, there's that whole scene with a doctor who, and
Mm.
Wendy says that his arm was dislocated by Jack in a sort of fit of rage. But the other question, of course, is Danny sexually abused by Jack? Uh,
Mm.
and this is something that Kubrick does not. It's not explicitly mentioned or dealt with in the film, but I think there are some very dark implications where Kubrick is suggesting this. And to me, this is one of the sort of central things about Room 237, because of course we don't see what happens when Danny goes in there. We see him going in, but we don't actually see what he sees in there. But when we see him again, is when he wanders into the great hall and he is
Mm.
disheveled and he is sucking his thumb and he is wearing that jumper which has the Apollo rocket on it.
Mm.
And what does Jack see when he goes into the same room where his son was assaulted in some way? Well, of course, he sees
Mm.
sex. He sees a woman. You know, he sees his desire. But of course, that is thwarted when he through the mirror, which is something mirroring is something that goes is fascinating and goes on a lot in throughout the entire film. But I think that there is an implication there that this secret room, which Danny is warned not to go into, is some, I think, very dark implication about an even worse aspect of Jack's abuse of his son. Uh,
I'm completely with you. I'm sold on that theory.
well,
Many bits of imagery go for that. You have other places you could go with that. It could be that the memory is the breaking of the arm that we were told about. It could be that Jack's experience with the hag in 237 is his basically reflecting on Wendy. That basically she looked good to him initially, and he knocked her up, and then afterwards he realizes he's stuck with this as he sees her, just this rotten old hag. and he's who's pursuing him forever, and he just wanted to get away from her. It could be that, but I'm going to be honest, Mr. D. I go for the same reading. I think there's plenty of extremely. There's just too much in there that you think would not need to be in there. There's too much that ties together, specifically the man in the bear costume.
Yeah,
Um, we should maybe quickly specify for Europeans. You may not have seen a lot of the stuff that's being referenced. Specifically, Mr. D referenced the examination in their apartment.
yeah,
That only exists in the American cut, which you can find. I think you can access it on Amazon Prime in the UK if you want. Um,
yeah.
but there is about 25 extra minutes of the film there,
Yeah.
which yeah,
Always
support the reading a fair amount.
always curious about why the why the different cuts. Do you know? I mean, is there any sort of was there ever any sort of explanation of why that scene was deemed either unsuitable or not
Hmm.
necessary for the European cut?
Um, yes, a host of reasons. Remembering Kubrick wanted perfection, but he also wanted success, and he was always sort of bothered by the fact that his films didn't get the recognition that he felt they deserved. And it just happened over and over again. So when The Shining was underperforming, kind of hilariously now in retrospect, he sent teams of editors on bikes round the city to cut the film while they're in cinemas to just kind of hasty, right, snip this, snip that, take off the additional ending that had
Oh,
the hotel manager Ullman visiting in hospital, take that out.
oh, thank.
Um,
I will say that is. I am very happy that was removed. I think that would have thrown it in a direction that I think is a bit stupid. I don't know.
yeah,
Just me.
no, that was basically it. It was underperforming, and he was getting a warning, so he sanctioned that cutting. But
Mm,
it also wasn't the only time he did it. He was, yeah, I kind of had a pattern of editing up to the
yeah.
last minute and even doing
Yeah.
edits while the film was released. So
Two,
it's not
two,
unusual for him, but it's the
no,
most drastic, I believe.
2001, after its premiere, he cut, I believe, 15 minutes out of it, which I don't think exists.
Oh,
I don't think you can actually. I don't think you can actually see what that 15-minute was. Yes, but that is the only time that film was ever shown with that extra bit in. So yes, really, literally, the night after the premiere, he cut 15 minutes from it. So
yeah. Um, it's odd to think of, but yes, he was kind of he was that involved. He was okay to do it. A perfectionist, but he wasn't tied to it. There's a story from Tom Cruise while they were doing Eyes Wide Shut of visiting Stanley, working in his editing stable, um, and he was editing The Shining. So he was,
wow, that's
yeah. I
amazing.
mean,
Amazing. Yeah.
as you said, he had all that footage. I think that would have probably been something like he knew a DVD was maybe he
Mm,
was considering a new DVD.
yeah.
Maybe well, actually, no. Wouldn't Blu-ray have been around?
No,
When did
no,
Blu-ray come?
Blu-ray certainly came out because Kubrick died in '99, so Blu-ray was certainly
Hmm,
after. I mean, DVD it was in its infancy, but no, Blu-ray I think was a solid 5 years or so after Kubrick's death. I would
okay.
think, or more. I don't know.
Hmm.
Um, but
It's
that
it's
that would
very
have been that would
possible
have
that he
been
was.
near the first release of those films on DVD, which I think were
Well,
released posthumously. So it may have been the DVD release, but
I think that would make sense. Yeah, you know, he did. I mean, Stanley Kubrick cared about his films, so when they were going to be transferred to a new medium or shown, he would check the print. He would
yep,
check it was done correctly. He would even check the cinema to make
yep,
sure they had the facility set up for it. And of course, his assistant Leon Vitali, who had done the casting for this film. Um, Very interesting figure. would be one of the people who, after Stanley's death, would ensure that all transfers were correct and to
Yeah.
the right specifications. It's amazing to have people who, for all the tales of people finding Stanley Kubrick impossible to work with, he had some people who were so loyal. I find that very touching.
Well, yes, it's a bit like, as I said, the experience. I mean, even Shelley Duvall, after that nightmarish ordeal, cried talking about Kubrick. That's something notable. There is on the original VHS release of Eyes Wide Shut, which I purchased uh, as soon as it came out. There are interviews with Spielberg and Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, and uh, I believe that both Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman both cry talking about talking
Mm.
about Kubrick and their experience with him. So, yeah, I mean, he did inspire certainly a huge amount of loyalty, and he worked with some of the same people time and again. I mean, there are sort of famously actors who appeared in three of his films. And I mean, in
Mm.
The Shining, the actor who plays Delbert Grady is also in Barry Lyndon, and is also
Indeed.
Alex DeLarge's father in Clockwork Orange. So, um,
It's quite a step up from the Carry On films, isn't it?
well, it depends upon which Carry On film. By the way, I just pulled this up. I had this file. I mean, speaking of Kubrick's sort of insistence on following the films through all their kind of incarnations to make
Mm.
sure that they appear their best. This is a letter written on Barry Lyndon's stationery, and it's dated December 8th,
Ooh.
1975. Dear projectionist, an infinite amount of care was given to the look of Barry Lyndon, the photography, the sets, the costumes, and in the careful color grading and overall lab quality of the prints and the soundtrack. All of this work is now in your hands, and your attention to sharp focus, good sound, and the careful handling of film will make this effort worthwhile. And then follows is a list of 10 instructions. Starting with, I mean, most of it is technical information about projection. Reel 3B, changeover dots error. The first changeover dots at the end of reel 3B are correct. The last changeover dots at the end of reel 3B are not correct. They are 1 foot 9 frames early. It's wonderful. Number 3, there should be no less than 15 foot lamberts of light on the screen and no more than 18. Of course, that was a measurement of the amount of light output for the projector. So, I mean, just to give you an
Mm.
example, Barry Lyndon was photographed at 1:166 aspect ratio. Please be sure you project it at this
Oh,
ratio, and
yes.
in no event at less than 1:175. So, you're right. I mean, there are a few other directors who would be so exacting about this. But again, when you have produced a work of art, which every aspect of it has been under your direction and control, then you should certainly care about it. That's an amazing
Uh,
document. People can
mm.
find that if they look for it.
Oh, it's wonderful. I mean, just what films get and merit that attention today?
Yeah,
What
indeed.
it's just so rare. It's so so rare. And hence the dedication. Hence why we keep coming back to it.
Yeah,
Um, you mentioned before we started that you had something on the carpet, the infamous shining carpet, and I couldn't let you get away without mentioning that because I thought I had a little note like, oh, I must ask
yeah.
Mr D about the
Well,
upholstery.
I'll tell you about that car. I mean, now, of course, there are. I mean, what we politely refer to as schizoid theories about that carpet. There's a film which I'm sure you've seen called, what is it called? Is it called Room 237?
Room 237. I haven't actually seen it, Mr D.
Oh,
I've
oh, it's certainly worthwhile. I mean, again, if you like Q level conspiracy theories about
Kubrick,
yeah,
eh?
about Kubrick, and it's sort of it's different people, it's these different characters giving their own interpretations. Some, of course, are eminently reasonable and thought provoking, and some of them are really out there. Including, of course, well, why is there tang which is this orange, powdered orange drink. Why is there tang in the larder? And of course, the theory being that this was Kubrick's way, because tang was developed for NASA, for
Oh
use by
no.
NASA, and of course, this was Kubrick's again reference, playful or otherwise, to the fact that he faked the moon.
Oh dear.
So that sort of thing. But it's
Ah,
an interesting film. But I will say, of course, you know, I would not discount a lot of these things, because I think that there is nothing in any shot, I would say, almost in any Kubrick film is accidental. Almost. I mean, obviously there's a few production errors, whatever, but I mean, things are there for a very specific reason. Kubrick chose all of those products. He did choose them. They're not just randomly placed there. He, for whatever reason, worked with the prop department, the art direction, and he approved all of these things, and there was a reason for it. He liked the look of them. There was some sort of symbolic reference, going on. I mean, also in the larder, very notably, there are tins of baking powder, called calumet, and there's
yes.
an there's a profile of a red Indian, uh, on those tins, and they're very specifically placed, sort of ganged up, looking towards Jack, the back of Jack's head, at certain points in there. You know
Mm.
what and again, it sort of lends itself to the sort of questioning reality nature, of the film. I mean,
It,
are these there,
mm.
incidentally? What is this implying?
It sounds schizo, but then you throw in, okay, look, you're specifically told in a line that I gather Stanley included as a bit of a sop to Mr. King. Like, there you go, there's your slop. There you are. That it was built on a Native American burial ground, and then Jack is you've got Native American art around, and Jack's just hurling a ball at it, which
Yeah,
I believe was a Jack Nicholson improvisation.
yeah, I
Could
I
be
believe
wrong.
so. Yeah, no, I think that's right, and doing it very aggressively. By the way,
Mm.
uh, yes, there's certainly those implications, but again, that you know, yeah, what is the importance of that? I mean, it is sort of certainly a Stephen King kind of slop explanation. Oh, that's what it is. It's a cursed Indian burial ground. Well, maybe not. So the carpet. Now, you can see here. You can see the carpet in question. There are other carpets in the film. I believe, certainly, the fact that the Overlook is both a place. It is a place which is suggested to have a long past. And
Mm.
Ullman, the manager, refers to it. Uh, um, um, why can't I remember the character's name? Scatman Crothers. The
Oh, Hallorann.
Hallorann. Yes. He alludes again to the sort of long history of the hotel. Again,
Got
we
that
get
name because he wouldn't quit Hallorann.
it,
I'm so sorry, Mr. D.
awful, absolutely awful. My God. Um, One of my favorite shots is him lying in his home in Florida with those extraordinary paintings of sort of black ladies
Mm.
on black velvet. Uh, but
Nubian goddesses.
Nubian goddesses, yeah. But I do think that, again, this is a place that it alludes to its illustrious past, but it is also, again, a place with distorted memories, and so I think it's a very deliberate thing to to put at the time what would have been at the time contemporary late 70s carpet. Like again, we there are aspects of the Overlook that have these Native American motifs and such, and they're, sort of luxury and beauty. There's a suggestion of architecture of the past, but then there's also, of
Mm.
course, the fact that, this place exists in the present as well, and of course it has this very aggressive 70s carpeting. But I'll tell you the thing about that carpeting. I mean, in addition to the fact that the pattern on the carpet itself is a maze, or alludes to a maze.
Mm.
But that carpet was actually designed not for the film, but it was designed by a British interior designer called David Hicks. And
Mm.
I I didn't know, I didn't know about this, but I happen to collect, amongst all the other weird things that I collect old books of interior design, architecture, decoration. I especially love and treasure, like sort of these country life books of the 1920s and
Mm.
30s, and like 60s and 70s. Selfridges tells you how to outfit your modern kitchen. I love these sort of books, and so I was at a bookshop once, and I found this book, and it was called David Hicks on Bathrooms. And I thought, what an unusual title for a book. What is this? And I opened it up, and it was a book published in the late 70s or mid 70s, and it was this British designer David Hicks, and it was all of these bathrooms that he had designed for various wealthy clientele. And I noticed that he often used. I mean, I noticed he used his own, like, upholstery, fabric designs and such. But I said, these some of these carpets look very, very much like that carpet in The Shining. And of course, lo
Mm.
and behold, it is what it was. So there's your bit of trivia about that
Yes.
carpet. And there's even a scene also with Danny lying on the floor, playing, like, using the pattern and the carpet. He's got a little I can't remember what he's.
Oh, I have it here.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So in a way, he is interacting with the carpet, as a kind of a maze structure, or at least a kind of, almost like a kind of map. And I think that there's a kind of implication that the carpet is a kind of microcosm of the endlessly repeating, unknowable, extensive, interior architecture of the hotel, or the hedge maze.
Mm.
We get an overhead shot of the hedge maze, if you recall, except it's a
Oh, yes.
model. And I've always been very intrigued in the relationship, again, between the pattern of that model of the maze and other patterns, the carpet, the Native American motifs,
Yeah.
things
It
like that.
it also seems to point forwards and backwards.
Yeah.
Which direction do you go in? There's so much in it.
Indeed.
Ah,
I
yes.
also love how that model of the hedge maze is so insane. Like, it's clearly not the same maze. I mean, you sort of, well, okay, of course they're going to have a model of their own maze, but it's so much larger. It's absolutely insane. It, there's that wonderful moment where Jack is standing above it, and that kind of
Yeah.
high register tinkling, like, Looney Tunes music plays, which is sort of slightly dissonant, and Jack has that, like, again, that just completely insane look on his face, looking down on this impossible hedge maze. And then, of course, you get that wonderful optically printed shot where he sees the little figures of Danny and Wendy walking in the model. Yeah,
It's such a great trick to disorientate the audience.
yeah, wonderful, wonderful things.
The John Baxter biography of Stanley Kubrick recounts his delight in leaving crew getting lost in the real maze.
Yes, I remember. I remember that. Yes, I mean that the people, that there was a map, and you could see it in the
Mm.
in the Vivian Kubrick documentary. There's a shot of Kubrick and the crew walking in there, and you can see right at the entrance. There's a map of the maze. Uh, and those were all real hedges in there,
Mm.
but they all died because, of course, they're in an enormously hot, indoor set, and so they all died. So they all had to be sprayed green again, and then sprayed
Yeah.
with the artificial snow, which is, I know that some of it was salt. Uh,
Mm.
they used salt to represent the snow, but yeah, I mean, utterly, utterly, utterly incredible scenes.
Such an achievement, you know. I think, yeah, I never really think of it as a set, that this was just a huge set in
Yeah,
Elstree.
yeah.
It's such a good job, and the fact that everyone there would have been absolutely boiling. You know, it's so hot there that they actually burnt the set down,
Yes, I mean
causing
that's
endless delays.
another
They
good
all
point.
look freezing.
Yeah,
Brilliant
they
stuff.
absolutely have to appear to be freezing, and yet of course yes, it was boiling
Mm,
hot most of the time. And yet yes, I mean that's a good thing to mention is that the set, at least a large portion of the set, burnt. I mean, was totally destroyed by fire. And this presented a massive problem because subsequently Kubrick discovered that the negative of many of the many of the takes of going up the stairs, the negative was scratched, uh, which is then was a terrible disaster because they
mm,
couldn't reshoot that because the set had literally been destroyed. They only discovered later when they came to print those shots again that that they saw that the negative was scratched. So I believe that they sent the Kubrick called up Kodak in America, and they actually had a bunch of their technicians work on ways of printing that so that the negative
mm,
scratch was obscured. Again, if you have an early copy of The Shining, you can see it. But later on, they also use CGI to completely remove all vestiges of that scratch. But yes, in earlier prints, you can still vaguely see that in some of those shots going up the stairs because there was no way to completely get rid of it. You know, having your negatives scratched or damaged is it was the kiss of death. You know,
mm. It's disastrous.
yeah.
And there's something in a lot of the transfers of older films. I think that you could probably digitally remove a lot of it, but I think they keep it as almost like a badge of honor. I could be hugely wrong, but
No, you're right.
um,
No,
I,
yeah. They I think
I,
they often selectively decide what they're going to keep. They don't generally remove all of the dust. Now there won't be much dust if it's a good transfer. In fact, the best sort of transfers are done in liquid. You know, so the I mean I don't know how this is handled now, but I know from my own experience doing photography is that when I've had some large format negative digitally scanned, it's actually done in oil. You know, the negative is immersed in a kind of fluid, which
mm,
obliterates any sort of fine scratches and dust, which is a problem. And I believe that this is sometimes done called wet gate printing when they do these transfers. But I don't know now what they do with digitization. But you're right. I don't. They often don't remove all of that because it's an artifact of what it was, which is a film, a physical object.
I find it quite charming in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Mm. There's a bit of an odd question I want to throw to you. It occurred to me when we were discussing Hallorann. It's something I haven't made my mind up about. It's just bothered me on recent watches, and it's just Hallorann's relationship to the hotel. When he talks, he's asked, "Are you afraid of what's in 237?" And I always wonder what Hallorann sees. If
Mm.
he shines, how does he manage to keep his head there? And that's always sort of, I've got answers, but I just don't know if they do the job, you know? So I wanted to throw that to you, um, see if you had any thoughts.
That's a very good question. Yes, and that's certainly something I've thought about because clearly I think it's quite clear that he understands that there is something malevolent. There is some, or at least potential malevolence there at the hotel.
Hmm.
And yes, of course he says I'm not scared of it. And of course he he continues to work there. I mean, if it was something so evil and distressing, why would he go back? Why would he be employed
Hmm.
there? Why wouldn't he stay away? I mean, either he's not, he truly isn't afraid of it, or he has some sort of mastery. I mean, he is some sort of adept in a way that allows him protection against this malevolence. But he also understands that whatever it is dangerous for Danny, because he said, like, don't you have
Mm.
no business stay out, stay out. He's very clear about that. And and then of course he realizes. I mean, he sees, he has the vision of that something bad is happening there, and so of course he makes that extraordinary journey um, on
Mm.
plane, and then and then takes the snowcat. Uh, he also, of course, is the he brings a plot device, which of course is the operating snowcat, which allow Wendy and Danny to escape. So I mean, in the end, he did save them, uh, but indirectly. But yeah, I certainly wonder. I don't know that I have any sort of solid idea about that either, because I feel like it's clear that he understands the kind of power or danger of this particular place.
Mm.
But then of course he works there. He's comfortable enough that this family, that this young boy and woman are going to be safe. Like, I don't know. It is an odd question, and I don't know that I have any particular. Well, do you have any sort of theory about this?
Well, I was wondering about your memory palace idea and just trying to recount it in my head what exactly is said. But Danny asks him, "Are you afraid of room 237?" And I think his answer is specifically just not to answer if he isn't about that room, but to reiterate the warning to Danny. And if the memory palace idea is strong, then that room is a specific memory for Danny, not for Hallorann.
Hmm,
So it wouldn't bother him. But he knows that's something that is potentially there for Danny that he shouldn't re
yeah,
examine.
I've
So
got this.
that's why he's not. Uh...
I've got the screenplay if you'd like to know. Uh,
Oh, yes, please,
yeah.
please.
So Halloran says, "Has Tony ever told you anything about this place, about the Overlook Hotel?" Danny says, "I don't know." And Halloran says, "Now think real hard, Doc. Think. Maybe he showed me something. Try to think of what it was. Mr. Halloran, are you scared of this place?" Halloran, "No, I'm scared of nothing here. It's just that, some places are like people. Some shine and some don't. I guess you could say the Overlook Hotel here has something about it that's like shining." Danny says, "Is there something bad here?" Halloran says, "Well, Doc, when something happens, it can leave a trace of itself behind. Say, like, is if someone burns toast." Halloran, "Well, maybe things that happen leave other kinds of traces behind. Not things that anyone can notice, but things that people who shine can see. Just like they can see things that haven't happened yet. Well, sometimes they can see things that happened a long time ago. I think a lot of things have happened right here in this particular hotel over the years, and not all of them was good." Danny says, "What about room 237?" Helen says, "Room
Mm.
237?" Danny says, "You're scared of room 237, ain't you?" "No, I ain't." "Mr. Halloran, what is in room 237?" "Nothing. There ain't nothing in room 237, but you ain't got no business going in there anyway, so stay out. You understand? Stay out." So that's the extent of that bit.
Mm.
And perhaps Halloran doesn't.
Yeah.
He also, I mean, it may be, as you said, a subjective thing that whatever is there, it's not accessible to everyone. Halloran is going to have his
Mm.
own vision of it. He's going to have his own version, his own experience with it, and he may not know. And it is really the sort of the fact that that Danny's experience of it may be completely different that gives him this sort of pause. I don't know.
Mm. Uh, I mean that's got something going. That it's not a room 101. It is just room 237 is very specific to an event between Jack and Danny, so no one else has to worry. But another road might be that I try not to repeat myself, but I like to draw the distinction between the Kubrick vision of The Shining and the King vision, which is an extrinsic versus an intrinsic horror. In that, for Stephen King, you could put anyone in the hotel and they would be undone because it's an evil, spooky, no good hotel. Um, whereas for Kubrick, I think it's more specific that the evil is within Jack. The problem is within Jack, and the hotel is just a space where that can be expressed.
Mm.
And if that's true, then Hallorann is okay because he doesn't have those issues. He doesn't have those problems. So that could be another explanation for it. But it rattles around my brain a bit. Sort of every time you come back to this film, you find something out
Yeah.
to something else to sort of puzzle about.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course it goes back to these fundamental questions. What is the name? I mean, is there something, as you say, about this place? Is there something special about this place, or is this place just the sort of locus of these sort of internal spiritual or psychological problems, or both? And again, never answered. Oh, I think that of course you can arrive at different answers every time you sort of think about it, and there's different threads that are going to be significant at certain times, and others that will be significant at other times, which is just the beautiful part about this film. But I do think that it is, as I said, I mean, there are also larger questions about humanity, about questions about civilization, questions about
Mm,
of sort of the movements of people, the different natures of people, questions about, again, structure of the family, the father, the father, the mother, and the son, and of course all the kind
mm,
of psychological, spiritual sort of things involved in that core relationship. The family, the sort of smallest example of the kind of the natal family unit. So and
mm,
again, do you believe in God, Stephen? Even questions about that, questions of the nature of evil. Um, and of course the fact that this trinity, this group of three, that the family is sort of, one thing that often happens in Kubrick films is different relationships between sort of three characters, three entities, And again, so much of this is about how Jack relates to Danny, how Danny relates to Wendy, how Wendy relates to Jack, Wendy's role with Danny, and then of course all of them versus the hotel, which ends up having its own sort of character and its own sort of influence upon their
mm,
upon their their inner relationships. And so the hotel becomes a sort of again a sort of architecture of civilization, of their own struggles. And of course, if your mind is disordered, then this manifestation of your memory and your mind will be disordered. So
mm,
and of course that there are also weird, like, I want to say light-hearted. I will mention the one light-hearted thing, but also there is the kind of implication of through the looking glass and the nature of a mirror. And of course, in
mm,
psychology, there's, depending on who you're talking about, there is, I mean, mirroring is a psychological concept, and you see, and there are so many examples. I just got to mention it again. People have never really done a close watch of the film. Just watch it and see how many both real and symbolic mirrors there are in the film. I mean, of course, Danny's often his experience when he's shining and talking to Tommy, the little boy who lives in his mouth, which is uh, which is always a slightly uncomfortable idea. But of course, his
mm,
first vision of the Overlook is as he's looking at himself in the mirror. There's a very well known shot of Jack eating breakfast in bed, and Danny is there, and the whole shot is shot in the mirror. They're not shot directly. Their shot is a kind of reversed reflection. Again, a distortion.
Mm.
Jack he's got a T-shirt on that has words. Again, Kubrick really hitting you over the head. Of course, you see the words are backwards. And then famously, one of the most famous devices of all is red rum. You know, that when
Oops.
Wendy actually sees the malevolent, she finally gets the red flag when she looks into the mirror. And what does she see in the mirror? She sees murder. You know, um, and the twins. Which of course was inspired by a photograph by Diane Arbus, the
Yes,
little
yes.
girls, who are of course a mirror of each other. Um, that when and often most of Jack's experiences with the supernatural happen in front of mirrors. So of course his
Mm.
dalliance in room 237 is in front of a mirror. His conversation with Velvet Grady in the bath is in front of walls of mirrors. His conversation with Lloyd, the bartender, is in front of a mirror. Uh,
Mm.
yeah, there's a lot of, I think, really thoughtful and intriguing sort of symbolism going on with the mirror in the film.
Absolutely. A lot of that is taken straight from Freud's, I get this wrong every time, it's Der Unheimlich or Das Unheimlich. But that essay, if folks want to read that,
Yeah,
but I think Kubrick takes it further than just the slightly unsettling nature of an inexact double,
yeah,
and takes that level of self-reflection into the symbolism too.
yeah. Yeah, I mean the idea, of course, of the double, the doppelganger, and and the
Mm.
the self and the shadow, and of course,
Mm.
what is the ultimate battle in the film? It's the father and the son. It's the son in the maze, literally running from the Minotaur, literally trying to escape the dragon. The father chasing, of course, the son being chased by his father, the dark shadow of the conquering and murdering father. And of
Mm.
course, for me, I mean, one of the most satisfying little visual things that happens is that Jack. We talked about. I mentioned my thought that Kubrick is exploring ideas of kind of the structure of civilization, and of course how primitive, quite primitive man, uh, and the veneer of civilization, how close or how far away removed are we from this primal nature, and of course, and this is something that Kubrick dealt with in 2001, famously,
Mm.
with the Australopithecus africanus, who touched the monolith. But of course, when Jack is chasing Danny in the maze, if he basically devolves, he goes in a man, and by the end of it, he's a caveman, because
Mm.
as he succumbs to hypothermia, whatever, he goes in, Danny, I'm coming, and by the end he's just like, and you see him finally, before you see him frozen the next day, you see him only as a dark shadow waving, which is what's an axe, but which just looks like, again, a slouching shadow of a caveman with his club, who is not succeeded, whose son has has his son has survived the ordeal of in the maze with the shadow of the father. This is all far fetched, but this is the kind of thing I love. I
No,
love
no,
to
we love it. We love
think
it.
about this, and the fact, of course, that you know that we can talk about ostensibly a horror film in these
And
ways.
Kubrick went for the dueling apes many times. Actually, Harry yesterday brought that up in Clockwork Orange discussions, that lots of shots of Alex and the Droogs fighting very clearly in
Yeah,
the poses
yeah,
mirror the apes fighting.
yeah,
Just,
yeah. I
oh, I
remember
love it so much.
there's that one shot of Alex. It's in slow motion, where
Mm.
he's leaping. It's when he leaps on Dim, and they fall into that horrible pond. Yeah, and there's
Yes.
just that shot of him, uh, distorted and ugly and animalistic, which is again something that Kubrick returns to over and over again, even in The Shining in its own way.
So absolutely not an overreach. In fact, there are many meanings of this film, none of which we would want to overlook.
No, very good.
Apologies, Mr. D. I can't help it.
You can't. No, it can't be helped. It can't be helped. One more thing I want to mention that I mentioned lighthearted. So for me,
Mm,
there's a shot of Danny watching television, and what is he watching?
yes.
He is watching the Coyote and Roadrunner from Looney Tunes, and of course, oh sorry, another motorbike, and so of course that ends up being a kind of premonition of Jack. Jack is the coyote and Danny is the roadrunner chasing Danny around.
Oh my
And of course,
goodness.
he outsmarts. So you remember there's that shot where Danny like backtracks on his own footprints,
Mm,
and he outsmarts Jack. That is clear. That's clearly Kubrick like calling back to the Coyote and Roadrunner. I just
oh my goodness.
I love the fact that within this all these very dark and foreboding and sort of terrible situations and scenes, that there is that one little glimmer of humor, which is reinforced by the fact
Mm,
that Hallorann imitates Bugs Bunny. He wah, wah,
of
what's up,
course,
Doc?
yes.
You know, so that's
Yeah.
a little bit of fun from Stanley Kubrick.
See, the man has a sly sense of humor. Can I throw one in there as well
Yes,
to end on? As I know you said you had 2 hours and you've been very generous with your time. Something that absolutely tickles me every time is Jack's line about Wendy being a confirmed ghost story and horror film addict. And
yes.
I just love that he's just bullshitting them in the interview. We see her reading books, we see her watching TV. She never looks at any of that stuff. He was just pulling that out of his ass.
I
Just,
do. Yeah, I've always
I
wondered
love it. It
about that.
cracks me up.
Yeah, yeah, I do wonder about that because no, I mean,
And she
although
does all the work.
she
He
does
never
all,
does his
he
job.
never does anything. He just sits.
Based.
He he just sits in the room typing, and of course we learn what he's typing eventually. A wonderful one of the wonderful most wonderful cinematic reveals, um, I think in cinema history. But yeah,
Mm,
I've never thought about that. I always thought that line, she's a confirmed ghost story, whatever. Because of course, then her visions of the Overlook are they're kind of hokey horror movie. Again, the spoopy
mm.
the spoopy skeletons. But no,
Yeah,
she
sorry, Euro Bros. Not in your
not
version.
in your version, not in your version. But I love it. I'm very glad for that bit. I think the American version's better than the European version.
Oh, agreed. Absolutely agreed. It completes so many readings. It's worth it. And don't come to Stanley Kubrick if you're short on time.
No.
You know.
Well, they reward, as you said earlier, they reward multiple viewings. I mean, I certainly, I mean, I didn't. I remember watching Barry Lyndon when I was like 17, and I love that
Mm,
sort of thing. I was fascinated with the 18th century. I didn't particularly like it very much, and of course now Barry Lyndon is another one of my favorite films ever made. So
yeah.
it rewards returning again and again. Certainly, and of course
Mm,
the privilege of being as old as I am is that I can go back to them at different periods of my life, and of course I will have a very different understanding. The things that interest me will be very different, than they
mm,
were 20 years ago, or whenever I first saw 30 years ago. So I first saw some of these.
mm. Maybe I can give a bit of an optimistic, uplifting ending. Barry Lyndon was the one I was worried about when showing it to the Lotus Eaters boys for our Kubrick project, and I was just absolutely delighted. Neither of them had seen Barry Lyndon, but both of them came away instantly loving it on the first watch. I thought that would be a tough sell, but no, they absolutely ate it up, and it was becoming. I think Harry had it as one of his favourites. So I was
Well,
delighted by
that's
that.
yeah, that's excellent because I've had mixed experiences. I've shown it to people, and actually, I've been surprised because most of the people who to whom I've shown it did they loved it. You know, they loved it quite quickly. But no, I certainly remember showing it to people who were bored to tears, and you know, so I never spoke to them again. But you know,
Quite
it's a
right.
litmus test. It's a litmus test. If you don't like, sorry, if you don't like this, then I don't want to be your friend.
I respect that. I respect that. Mr. D, this has been an absolute delight for me. I've really enjoyed your insight on this film, and yes, I'd been wondering on how you'd approach it, what you would say about it for a while. So this has been a treat.
Well, it's been a great treat for me. I mean, the time has flown past, and I could if my if my voice my larynx was not about to fall out, I would happily talk about it for some hours more. But no, it's been an absolute delight having a conversation. Hopefully there's been something interesting. I would say that I would defer to your expertise and thoroughness because you have certainly read and seen much more. I have a weird disposition where when I have a work of art, I'm very cautious, or an artist that I like. I'm very cautious about learning too much. You know, I mean,
Mm,
I know a lot about Kubrick, and I'm fascinated. I've listened to a lot of the interviews. I've never read a biography. I know a lot of biographical information, but I've never read a biography because often I just I don't want too much information. I don't want to know too many things that will spoil that can spoil the illusion.
mm.
No, it's certainly been wonderful, and you've given me a lot of things that I've never thought about and information that I'd like to look up. My thanks is to you for having me on
And
and for all that.
likewise, likewise with the Memory Palace. You know, that's okay, just one of every time you approach this film with someone, you do get a different view of it, which of course suits the film. But well, I will end our recording now and reiterate my thanks. I suppose for anyone watching, I will have a link to John Dee's Twitter in the description. And if you want to hear even more about The Shining, you can check out the episode 4 of the Stanley Kubrick history on lotuseaters.com, or you can also listen to my audio commentary for the US extended cut of the film. And The Shining is so multifaceted that I've been able to talk about almost completely different things in every single one of those. So many paths to mine there. But, Mr. D, thank you again ever so much, and I'll stop the recording now.